So earlier this week we discussed the SPHA-T, the heavy artillery piece deployed by the Republic during the Battle of Geonosis, and I mentioned in that video that it was ultimately replaced by a different vehicle, the RX200, and I figured today we could take a closer look at that vehicle and the role it played in the Republic military and why it ultimately did replace the much heavier artillery piece seen at the opening phases of the war. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, we're all familiar with the events of the Battle of Malastare. Republic forces face off against Separatist troops, and ultimately end up accidentally releasing the Zillo Beast, which then has to be subdued by these weird Republic laser tanks. So, today I figured it was a great opportunity to discuss those weird Republic laser tanks and their relation to their bigger brothers that we saw during the Battle of Geonosis. But like all vehicle videos, let's just start with the numbers. The RX200 Falchion-Class assault tank was designed by Rathana Heavy Engineering and deployed by the Grand Army of the Republic during the midpoint of the Clone Wars, and would remain in service throughout the second half of the war and into the reign of the Empire. At 28 meters long, it was far smaller than its predecessor, and it did have a smaller weapon system as a result. As opposed to its predecessor, which was armed with a single heavy turbo laser, the RX200 was armed with a single NNJ-40 Thunderbolt heavy ion cannon, which sort of swapped damage for the ability to disable electronic systems, which was very effective at knocking fighters out of the air, making it actually a really capable anti-air platform, by the way. On top of that primary weapon, though, it was protected by a pair of light blaster cannons, one on either side of the vehicle, which prevented infantry assaults against the artillery piece. It was capable of a pretty impressive speed, about 90 kilometers an hour, which is pretty fast for a vehicle of its size and its capability, but there was a trade-off. It had much lighter armor than other vehicles of its class, and as a result it was fairly susceptible to assault, especially by heavier munitions from Separatist vehicles. And it would be crewed by a crew of 4, which is way smaller than the 30 that the SPHA had. This crew included 2 pilots, a gunner, and a commander. On top of that, it could carry 2 passengers, making it capable of carrying out some light transport duties as well. Now, while its predecessor, the SPHA, which it will be compared to a lot during this video if you haven't figured that out already, was designed to engage heavily armored targets in the air, taking out things like ascending capital ships and things of that nature. This vehicle was more geared toward a more common threat the Republic found themselves facing on the battlefield: Separatist starfighters and Separatist bombers. And while they could engage larger vehicles when coupled together in larger units, they were primarily intended for engaging low-flying Separatist bombers and fighters as an anti-air unit. Well, technically they are classified as an artillery piece. They really weren't capable of attacking ground targets. Their turret could swivel further down than the SPHA, but that still wasn't necessarily ideal for engaging things like vehicles on the ground. That being said, their ion cannon would have been deadly against basically any Separatist vehicle, and really anything in the air. An ion blast in an atmosphere against a low-flying starfighter, for example, almost certainly knocks that starfighter out of the sky and causes it to be destroyed in a fiery crash, which is a great tool against Separatist starfighters. And on top of that, this weapon was, like its predecessor, a beam weapon, making it able to sweep the skies in a very effective manner that would be devastating to droid starfighters. They traded out the legs that its predecessor had with repulsor lifts, making it able to move faster and move over rougher terrain. That did come at the cost of preventing it from moving through heavier shielding, but ultimately, how often were you going to move your anti-air piece into a shielded environment? They were going to be best used almost out in the open. But while they were originally designed and intended to be used against Separatist starfighters, we ultimately saw them used very effectively against the Zillo Beast, as the ion cannon beams that the primary weapon of these tanks can produce ended up being fairly effective at stunning the Beast, a method that was used both on Malastare and on Coruscant. Now, there are a couple other interesting tidbits about the way this vehicle was deployed. While we do see them deployed relatively offensively on Malastare, they were primarily designed as a defensive vehicle, often deployed around installations to protect them from Separatist air assault. So these would be commonplace around large Republic bases, and there likely were units of these stationed at military facilities on planets like Coruscant in the event of a Separatist attack on the Republic capital. And And this role would remain pretty standard for these vehicles, with them staying in this capacity all the way through into the reign of the Empire, where they continued to serve as batteries of anti-air units around Imperial facilities during the early days of the Empire. Now, they would be replaced with stationary turbolaser positions, which were deemed to be more effective, but that would take time, and during the early years of the Empire, particularly during that transition from the Empire, or from the Republic and their clone forces to a more modern Imperial military, these were relatively commonplace at Imperial bases. But like most Republic vehicles, these were ultimately replaced by Imperial versions, which, like I mentioned, were mostly stationary. The Empire didn't have nearly as much of a need for a heavy anti-air cannon as the Republic did, as the Empire, once again, didn't see themselves ever facing the kind of war that the Republic faced, which obviously was a mistake, but was still the mentality of the Empire, especially fairly early on. That would ultimately mark the end of the legacy of these vehicles. The SPHA and the RX200 were relics of the Clone Wars that didn't see much service beyond that, but they still served very interesting and very unique roles within the Grand Army of the Republic. If you'd like to learn more about the SPHA and the role it played in the Republic military, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that I put out earlier this week. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think I'm right about my assertion that this vehicle was misclassified. Do you think it really could have been a viable anti-ground unit artillery piece, or do you think it really was primarily anti-air? And by the way, before anyone points out that this could be anti-air artillery, it's described as direct fire artillery on a few occasions, and it doesn't seem right to me. So I would love to know what you think down below. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can also leave those down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.